Welcome to Doctors Unbound, your show devoted to doctors who are, well, unbound by physician stereotypes. Get a behind-the-scenes look at doctors that are breaking the mold and breaking into the worlds of technology, writing, investing, politics, just to name a few. This is Doctors Unbound, where you'll hear from experts with the insights to help you go to the next level. Let's get this show started. Here is your host, Dr. Dave Draginas.
Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of Doctors Unbound. Today's episode may be just a bit controversial. Marijuana has been in the news quite a bit recently. California has joined the states making recreational marijuana use legal. However, Jeff Sessions and the Justice Department announced that they are doing away with the Obama administration's Cole memo. And apparently that was a document that outlined how the federal government would enforce marijuana laws, stating that the feds wouldn't interfere with states that legalize medical and even recreational marijuana use as long as those states followed certain guidelines. Well, to say that there is now chaos in this multi-billion industry would be an understatement. There's going to be lots about it in the news. So I suppose that it's a little bit apropos that today's physician guest is an expert on medical marijuana. And our conversation stays mostly on the medical side of the subject, including how she ended up opening a marijuana practice. We take a deep dive into what her practice actually looks like, the types of patients that she treats, the types of medical conditions, dosing of marijuana, and things like that. And also at the end of the session, we talk about how she's pivoting her practice in the new year. So definitely a lot of interesting stuff in this podcast episode. I do want to apologize to you in the beginning. There are a few minutes at the beginning of the episode where the audio is just really spotty. If you just bear with it for a couple of minutes, it gets better, it clears up, and the conversation is definitely worth listening to. So please take a deep breath and enjoy this episode with Dr. Rachna Patel. Welcome to another episode of the Doctors Unbound podcast. I am excited for our guest today, who is Dr. Rachna Patel. She's been practicing in the area of medical marijuana since about 2012. This can be a taboo topic in our society, so I'm sure it's going to make for some interesting conversation. Dr. Patel, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. This is going to be a fascinating subject to talk about. But first, I'd like our listeners to get to know you a little bit better. And Sure. One of the topics that comes out is morning routines. I was curious if you have a morning routine, and if so, if there's anything you wish you might change about it.
So my morning routine is I like to get up and get going right away, right? So my trick is, so that I don't sort of lay around in bed, is that I make commitments, whether it's a podcast interview like this, or a meeting with my team, or scheduling in walks. I love going on long walks in the mornings just to sort of clear my mind and get myself mentally prepared for the day. So one of those things, I'm not a routine sort of person. So I sort of have, a basket of things that I can pick and choose from depending on my day.
Gotcha. And is that something that you determine the night before? Or do you just wake up and say, I'm choosing this from kind of the basket of things?
Well, some things are already scheduled, like meetings with my teams and podcast interviews. But then on a day that I don't have anything scheduled, I sort of pick from the basket in terms of, what will serve me well today in terms of mindset. Okay,
cool. And then how about a favorite food or drink? What is that for you?
So a couple years ago, I stopped eating sugar and carbs. So I thrive on protein. So there's a protein shake that I actually get. I really should make my own, but given that I hardly go into the kitchen, there's a protein shake that I get from Costco that sort of does a job for me.
Okay, that's Are you following a particular type of diet, or is it just cutting out the sugar and the carbs?
Cutting out the sugar and the carbs. I try to make it as easy as possible, but it keeps me, in terms of sleep, I sleep better. I don't need to sleep as much. My mood is great. My energy levels are great. So that's all I stick to is eliminate as many carbs and sugar on a daily basis as possible.
That's good. I imagine you don't have kind of the crashes that you typically see after a big carb load.
No, I don't. But when I slip, I do.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's great that you're able to do that. I know that I need to do something like that. I just haven't been able to implement it yet, but that's certainly motivational for me to make that change in my diet. How about a hobby that you like to do when you're not working?
I love to either in the summertime go swimming or go hiking. That's what I spend a lot of my free time doing, especially, being in California in the Bay Area. I mean, there are, hiking trailheads around the corner from, basically around every block. So it's pretty accessible here. So that's what I do.
That's cool. And it's awesome to be able to take advantage of the environment around you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Okay. So we're going to move more now into your expertise here. So let's start at the beginning. How did you end up starting a medical marijuana practice?
Yeah. So it all starts with an ad that I saw on Craigslist, right? Now, what the heck was I doing on Craigslist? I've never found Craigslist to be shady, but I've definitely gotten judgment when I've said, yeah, I found an ad on Craigslist. But basically, I never quite gave up on my dumpster diving ways from back in college, and I do a lot of buying and selling off of Craigslist. I found roommates off of Craigslist, so Craigslist has been very essential and pivotal in my life. But in any case, what happened was I saw an ad that said medical marijuana doctor needed, so that piqued my curiosity. Okay, so I started to dig into the research. Now, one of my motivations was that I was training in emergency medicine. And, I was one of those people that I truly went into medicine because I really wanted to make an impact on people's lives. Mm-hmm. And here's what I found. So on the one hand, I was handing out prescriptions, mainly for pain medications, because that's the most common complaint that you see in the emergency room. And on the other hand, I was seeing patients coming in for side effects from these medications. They were coming in coming in having being addicted to these medications. And then the worst case scenario was that I was in the unfortunate position of having to resuscitate patients that had overdosed on these medications, right? So here I am, as doctors, we're supposed to be problem solvers, but I wasn't really solving a problem. In fact, I felt like I was creating problems, right? So I kept on digging into the research, and by the end of the year, what I found really compelling was that it seemed to have a lot of potential to treat chronic pain, and that's really kind of what stuck out to me. And there was one particular study where the lead investigator was Dr. Donald Abrams, and that study, what it showed was that patients who use both opioids and marijuana together, not only did they have clinical outcomes in terms of pain relief, but a lot of them were able to reduce the doses of their prescription opioid medications. So that was sort of a life-changing study that I encountered. And so that's when I decided, okay, you know what? The books can say one. Really, I got to see how this plays out in the real world. So that's when I decided to sign up to work at a medical marijuana clinic. That was back in 2012, and now we're in 2017, almost close to 2018. At this point, there's no turning back because I am having incredible success in terms of clinical outcomes. But not only that, just in terms of quality of life, I'm having a profound impact on people's lives.
Okay, so you started. Did you respond to the ad and then start working for one of these clinics?
Yeah, I did. But here's the thing. The industry is shady, okay? So basically what happened was that as soon as medical marijuana became legal for well, as soon as marijuana became legal for medical use and conservative clinics pop up, that were basically mills that were just handing out cards. And that's really where that's the type of clinic that I ended up at. And within like the first 2 weeks, I was like, okay, I can't do this long term. There's no integrity in this, and there's no gratification in this either. And so it was like, okay, I got to learn the ropes somehow, and I have to earn capital, right? So I have to keep on doing this. But what I found while I kept on doing it was that I worked with a lot of children in Sacramento, and they would come into me and they're like, Doc, walk me through exactly how I need to use this, because that's the information I'm not getting from getting a card, but I have no clue how to use it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I get side effects, sometimes I don't. So, I'm looking for consistent results. And so that's what I started doing. I started walking patients through how to use it. And then eventually I started my own practice so that I can have more control over how I practice.
Gotcha. So you went from kind of starting with that ad and maybe not liking some of the ways that it was practicing, and then moving into finally being able to do your own practice.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. And can you give us some details about your practice now, kind of, the types of patients, medical conditions that you see, maybe how you're compensated, how the compensation model works, things like that?
Yeah, sure. So it's just like any other doctor's visit, right? You come in, you fill out paperwork, and then I sit down with the patient and we walk through their medical history. I'm looking at, sort of the history of their medical condition. I'm looking at what sort of prescription medications they've taken to help their condition, what sort of alternative therapies they've turned to. And then what I'm going into is specifically how to use medical marijuana, right? So components of this include what specific combination of cannabinoids to use. Which method of administration is going to work best for their specific medical condition or combination of medical conditions, how much of the medical marijuana to use, when to use it, how often to use it, how to avoid side effects, what to do in case they get side effects, and then also just advice on how to select products once they're at a medical marijuana dispensary. Because it's not like a pharmacy where you just sort of give a piece of paper that your doctor gave you and then you get some medication in return. That's not how it works. There's more freedom at a dispensary for consumers to really purchase what they'd like. And I'm giving them specific direction into what specifically to select. Now, it is a cash practice. Reason being, insurance does not cover the cost of the evaluation. Like a lot of the insurance companies are under federal regulation. I think it has something to do with Medicare and Medicaid, and for that reason, they don't reimburse patients for the visit. What other specific questions do you have about how I practice?
Maybe if we could go through maybe one of your most, if there is a most typical diagnosis, and maybe kind of like what that encounter looks like, and maybe even some of the specifics, like you were talking about how you prescribe the marijuana and kind of the thought process that goes into that.
Yeah, sure. So the most common conditions that I treat are chronic pain, anxiety, and insomnia. Now, just beyond that, I also treat nausea, vomiting, lack of appetite from typically patients that are undergoing chemo. And then, there's other patients that and also cancer patients that have residual pain from long-term chemo treatment as well. So those are the more common conditions that I treat. Now, pain is sort of a broad category, right? So within pain, there's a lot of conditions of chronic pain. So we're talking about fibromyalgia, we're talking about back pain, a lot of sciatica, a lot of pain that results from degenerative disc disease, herniated discs, migraines. Also, patients who have multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease. A lot of these conditions are conditions that have sort of proved to be resistant to conventional medical treatment, and so they sort of spin their wheels. They sort of then go into searching for alternative treatments. and then they may spin their wheels there, and then finally they're like, you know what, I'm sort of at my wit's end, and I'm turning to medical marijuana at this point because I don't, I'm not left with very many options. And then in terms of how, like the logic behind how I go about, recommending, let's just say, combination of chemicals. So when I mentioned cannabinoids, cannabinoids are the chemicals that the marijuana plant makes. Okay, and they're specifically called phytocannabinoids because they come from the plant. The word phyto means plant. So the main chemicals that are made in the marijuana plant are THC and CBD. So it's typically a combination of the two, or a higher concentration of one or the other, depending on the medical condition. Now, in states where marijuana has been legalized for recreational use, the advantage that these folks have is that products are mandatorily laboratory tested, right? So these people know exactly what they're putting in their body because they know exact percentages, exact milligrams of the amounts of CBD, of THC, as well as some of the other cannabinoids in the marijuana plant. So it's going to really depend on the medical condition. But just to give you some examples, let's take CBD, for instance. So CBD has antispasmodic properties, right? So I've seen patients clinically, such as patients with multiple sclerosis, benefit from high amounts of CBD because it helps to relieve the spasticity that they experience.
Okay. And how do you dose that? And how are people, getting the marijuana? I guess what forms of ingestion or how are they consuming it, or intaking it into the body?
Yeah, so there's various different ways to consume it, right? Other than smoking. I typically recommend to my patients to not smoke marijuana because long term it has the potential to do damage. The other ways include, so an alternative to smoking, another form of inhalation is called vaporization. And basically what that is that you use a device called a vaporizer. And that what that does is that it heats the plant material rather than burning it. And so what you're avoiding is the combustion reaction, and it's the combustion reaction that creates the hydrocarbons or the pollution that's doing damage to your lungs. So that's one way. Second way is known as edibles, right? So it goes well beyond your stereotypical pot brownie.
Okay.
Yeah. So you on the market you have mainly what you have are chocolates and gummies. But the industry's evolved enough now to the point where you have healthier options. You have like gluten-free options, sugar-free options, vegan options. So it's getting more and more evolved. Now, in states where marijuana has been legalized for recreational use, every segment cannot have more than 10 milligrams of THC. So it's becoming more and more easier for the consumer to know exactly what they're putting in their body. Another way to use it is sublingually or under the tongue, and this method is typically referred to as tinctures. And then you also have topical formulations of marijuana. So basically, this is like an ointment that has the chemicals, the cannabinoids extracted in it, and you can apply it to an affected area. And then you have rectal and vaginal formulations of marijuana as well. So wide variety of options. And then to answer your question about dosing really comes down to a titration process, and it's different for every patient. A lot of it has to do with the fact that marijuana is a fat-soluble substance, right? So it varies. It's like vitamin D almost. Everybody holds on to it differently. So some patients need higher doses. Some patients need lower doses. So it's going to vary.
So you'll bring them in for an appointment, maybe set them on a dose, and then they'll follow up in some amount of time and adjust the dose. Is that kind of how that aspect of it works?
Yeah, most of the time, I've sort of developed a method where if I walk them through it, I would say 90% of the patients don't even need to follow up because there's enough flexibility in the method for them to sort of play around with it and figure out what's going to. They know when it's too much, and they know when it's not enough. And they figure it out. But no, there are definitely patients that I have followed up with to adjust the dosing.
Gotcha. And so much to unpack in that answer that you gave. With regard to these different methods of consuming, is that what drives the method? Is it driven by the patient preference? Is it driven by the specific medical condition that they're trying to treat, or something else?
Yeah, so mainly it's driven by the medical condition that they're trying to treat, right? Because some are more effective for certain conditions than others. Other times you can have like 2 or 3 methods that are effective. So it comes down to a matter of patient preference, and it comes down to pricing as well. Some methods are a lot more expensive than others. So, those are the main factors that sort of that it boils down to.
Gotcha. And we talked about the states where this is recreational use is legal. Do you know offhand like what those states are? Where are we talking about?
Yeah, so we're talking about Maine and Massachusetts, and that was recently legalized in the November election 2016. Okay. We're talking about Nevada, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and now California as well, Alaska. And that's 7. And then the 8th is the District of Columbia.
Interesting. So it looks like we're starting on the coast and we're working our way in, kind of.
Yeah, I think that's generally how it tends to politically work. So
very, very interesting. Okay. And so a patient will come in, you see them, they get presumably a script of some sort, and then I guess what happens after that?
Yeah, so they get what's called a recommendation formally, but colloquially it's known as a medical marijuana card. Okay. So this can work a couple different ways depending on the state that you're in. Okay, so say you're in a state that has legalized for medical use, one of 2 things can happen. Okay, in some states, such as California, you're not required to register with the state. So you can take the paperwork that's issued by a doctor straight away to dispensary. Okay. And that will then allow you to gain entry into that dispensary. Now, if you're in a state that does require registry with the state, then there's an extra added process. You have to submit your paperwork, either you or your doctor have to submit your paperwork to the state, and then the state will evaluate your file, and then they will then issue a medical marijuana card. Now, some states have sort of a temporary card that they issue, in the interim. Mm-hmm. But that's sort of, I guess, so it's 3 categories then that it falls into. The vast majority of states do require registry with the state.
Gotcha. And so is it actually you physically will not be allowed into that building or store if you do not have that card?
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly how it works.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. And is there any Amazon way to get this online yet, or is it all just a physical location at this point?
So, you mean in terms of purchasing products?
Sure.
Interestingly enough, California seems to have a lot of loopholes in its laws. And so there are some places that do actually deliver by courier service.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
And in order to open this kind of practice, what is required? Like, do you have to be a physician, an MD, or a DO? Do you need to have an active medical license, residency training? What's required for, let's say, somebody listening to the podcast out there who says, "Oh, this might be something I'm interested in"?
Yeah, so basically in the state of California, as long as you are a licensed physician, you're sort of good to go. There's really not much of a requirement other than that. There's no sort of formal training. It's almost like how emergency medicine was back in the day. There was a point where a lot of physicians got grandfathered into emergency medicine. Mm-hmm. I imagine it, depending what direction this sort of field takes, and I think it has incredible medical application. I know that there's sort of been, they're not firmly established. I think they're sort of working to establish themselves. But I know there's an American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine, but they really haven't kind of sort of got things running in a solid way yet. So there's no formal training. I mean, everything that I know is from hanging out in PubMed for like hours, since back in like 2012. So I am constantly reading medical studies, and then I am seeing how it plays out clinically, and then I'm using both to really hone this. Basically, I've created a protocol to use medical marijuana by medical condition to hone this protocol. That's a combination of what I've used. But, quite frankly, a lot of what you learn in basic sciences and medical school comes to tremendous use, especially pharmacology.
Gotcha. Do you ever have any patients that come by where you feel like you need to treat them with something other than marijuana, maybe some other medicine, or even further than that, somebody who comes in, you say, you know what, this is not something that I feel comfortable, prescribing this for you?
Yeah, so there are definitely specific conditions where I have not had success, and they've been conditions of chronic pain. So let me give you two examples. Shingles, severe cases of shingles, I've not had good clinical outcomes from with the use of medical marijuana. Same with severe cases of spinal stenosis. This is where, even if the patient ambulates, walks for like 500 feet, they're in excruciating pain. I've not had good success with that. I've also had patients come in looking to treat or cure their cancer with medical marijuana. And that's always a tough conversation to have, because they sort of have their hopes up on using this to, treat or cure their cancer. And, I don't blame them. There's a lot of misinformation out there on the internet. And that's where they're sort of getting these anecdotes from that, it'll treat or cure my cancer. And so I have to, explain to them that, look, there's certainly research out there, but the research is in petri dishes and in mice and in rats. There's very small amount of research in humans, nothing conclusive that you can say from this research. And clinically, I haven't seen, any sort of regression of tumors from patients using medical marijuana. So that's always a tough conversation to have.
Oh yeah, for sure. I can imagine that.
Yeah.
When it's a life and death situation, it's tough to have that conversation. Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. What do you say to the critics out there who are saying, you know what, this is just a way, to profit off of all those people who just want to use pot and are just kind of gaming the system, using this, this kind of loophole to go ahead and do that?
Yeah, so here's the thing. There's a misconception out there that everyone who uses marijuana is looking to get high off of it. So every patient that walks into my office, the one thing that they always tell me is, Dr. Patel, I'm not looking to get high off of marijuana. I have this condition. Nothing is working, and I need a solution to my problem. So those are the patients that I'm getting, that there are patients out there that are looking to use it medically. They don't want it to affect their ability to function. They don't want it to affect their relationships, their performance at work. They don't want it to affect their everyday life. And so there's a huge number of those people. They obviously haven't been vocal about it because there's a lot of stigma. I'd say the recreational users have certainly been more vocal about it than the medical users. But there's, my practice wouldn't exist if I didn't have enough of those people walking into my practice telling me that. Gotcha.
Okay, I'm going to change subjects just a little bit. Not subjects in general, but just kind of the method that we were talking about. With regards to the financial side of this, and I'm not sure, how much insight you'll have into this, but, I subscribe to a financial newsletter, and one of their recent advisories was, buy marijuana stocks in 2018. And a lot of it had to do with, changes that they see coming in California and maybe elsewhere. What are your thoughts on this from an industry standpoint, and acceptance kind of going forward 2018 and beyond?
So I'm going to give you my perspective from being a physician, from a medical perspective. Okay, so I mentioned that the most common conditions that I treat are chronic pain, anxiety, and insomnia. And who in America and even around the world doesn't suffer from one of those three conditions? There's very few people, I think, that do or that don't. And so if you think about it, this one medicine has the potential to replace a lot of commonly prescribed pharmaceutical drugs, right? And if you think about it, the pharmaceutical industry is an industry of multi-billions of dollars. So, in that sense, the statement that's being made makes sense to me from a medical perspective.
Okay. And, do you see that playing out with, the opioid crisis obviously has been huge in medicine in the last year or so. So do you see this as a potential solution for that crisis as well?
Yeah, I mean that's why what I saw in emergency medicine, what I saw going on. I saw medical marijuana as a great alternative, and it's proven to be true time and time again. And in fact, I mentioned that this study showed that patients were able to reduce the doses of their opioids, not even just opioids, but actually antidepressants, anxiety medications, anticonvulsants, which are commonly prescribed for pain. Not only that, but I have a lot of patients that are able to eliminate the use of these medications completely and just manage their pain with the use of medical marijuana. So is it a solution to the opioid epidemic? Most certainly.
Okay. And now just kind of flipping the switch a little bit and thinking about physicians out there who might be thinking about incorporating this medical model into their practice, or maybe even as a practice alternative. What advice would you give to doctors out there considering this type of practice?
I would give the same advice that my attendings have given me when I was training time and time again, which is know your medicine, right? So dig deep into the research in PubMed, get experience when it comes to treating patients, and know the nuances of how to use this medication.
Okay, that's solid advice for any practice, I guess, that you're going to get into.
Yeah.
What is one thing or one action that you would like our listeners to take after listening to this episode?
So this is sort of something that I live by, and it may be from the fact that I was born and raised in Jersey, but basically, don't buy the bullshit that people try to feed you. So, that's what I tell you.
What is the one thing that you wish you did differently in your career thus far?
You know what? Nothing. I definitely, got the sense that I was never the type of person who wanted to just clock in and clock out and not sort of really take into account the depth of my actions on the life of other people. And so I definitely feel like I've made the right decision. I can tell you for a fact today that I practice as a doctor exactly how I want to practice. I am the human being that I want to be with my patients, and there's a lot of gratification that comes with that.
Okay, cool. How about one resource that you might recommend to the listeners out there?
One resource that I would recommend to listeners. Let's see. I'm big on outsourcing, and so
okay.
I think a lot of doctors out there, whether you're working on your own or you're working for somebody else, I think this is a resource that you should utilize, because there's a lot of little things in life that sort of get in your way that you can just sort of hand off to other people. Like say you want to, like right now, I'm selling furniture in my office, right? Because I'm closing down my practice. I can, send pictures over to the virtual assistant, and then they can then post it, on all sorts of different places. And then all that's left for me to do, they can even arrange for a time for the person to come into my office and pick it up. And then all I have to do is accept payment and hand over the item to them. So, this would be, and I'm, you can pay small amounts of money to somebody to complete this task. And yet, you're creating, you can then spend your time, doing more quality things that you want to do.
Gotcha. And are you switching locations with your practice, or are you
Yeah. So, okay. So I should have brought this up. So what I'm doing is I'm closing out my brick and mortar practice and transitioning to an online practice. Reason being, I am getting phone calls from people all over the country and all over the world. And basically, their question is, Dr. Patel, how do I safely use medical marijuana? So, in an effort to reach more people and impact more lives, I am scaling what I'm doing by creating an online protocol. So, typically, what I walk patients through by medical condition, I've video recorded, and it's going to be made available for purchase through my website. Now, I'm still going to I love doctoring, so I'm still going to do virtual consultations, but it just won't be in the context of my office.
Gotcha. And is there any limitation as far as where the patient is located, where you can, I guess, see them, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it's going to be in the capacity of a consultant-client relationship as opposed to a physician-patient relationship, right? So it's more for informational and educational purposes rather than medical advice that I'm giving. Does that make sense?
It does kind of. At the end of that visit, do they still get this medical marijuana card, or is it they have to now obtain that in a different way?
So they have to obtain it in a different way. So I'm moving away from that in an effort to like I said, to reach more people.
Gotcha. Okay. And kind of our last question, the one place that you'd fly to tomorrow if you had no commitments and infinite resources?
So it would definitely be a tropical island somewhere on the beach. And in fact, in February, once I close my practice, I'm temporarily moving to Maui.
Oh, wow.
So realizing that dream.
Very, very cool. We've been to Maui a couple times, and I do admit it is one of our favorite spots.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, where can people reach you if they want to get in touch with you?
So best place to reach me is going to be on my YouTube channel. You can just Google YouTube Dr. Rachna Patel or YouTube The Medical Marijuana Expert. And I have, what I do on my YouTube channel is I answered a lot of commonly asked questions that people have about medical marijuana and just marijuana in general. And I also am constantly responding to comments on my YouTube channel. So if anybody in your audience has questions for me, they're more than welcome to post them in the comment section there. And then, of course, there's my website, which is drrachnapatel.com.
All right. Very cool. Well, Dr. Rachna Patel, thank you for this interview.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Doctors Unbound podcast. Remember to head over to doctorsunbound.com to access all the show notes and resources discussed in this episode. Now, it's your turn to be unbound.
Wow, I am so impressed you listened all the way through the end of the outro. Thank you very much. I just want to say thank you. That is fantastic. I would love to hear from you. How are your New Year's resolutions doing? Why don't you reach out to me? Let me know. It's about 1 week in. Are you still on top of your New Year's resolutions? Let me know. Take care. Bye-bye.